Migration is by no means a recent phenomenon in China and has taken place throughout China's history, yet it is now occurring on an unprecedented scale in China. In 1982, it is estimated that there were only 11 million floating migrants in China. In the year 2000, there were close to 100 million floating migrants in China away from their place of household registration. Based on the graph, this number has increased to 225 million in the year 2010. Floating migrants are now to be found in every Chinese province, in cities, towns, and villages across the country, working in a range of occupations. So, let us now examine China's migration patterns and why these came to be so. There are three main economic belts in China, namely that of the Western, Central, and Eastern belts. In the 1980s, the migration flows were directed primarily towards coastal provinces such as Guangdong and Zhejiang. Major flows between provinces were largely unidirectional, and the major players would either export provinces such as Sichuan or import provinces such as Guangdong. In many ways, interprovincial migration flows are indicative of the changes in China's economy since the introduction of free market reforms, especially in relation to the demand and supply of low-skilled labour. Economic growth was heavily biased towards the urban regions, in particular, those located in eastern coastal provinces. The presence of special economic zones in those areas attracted foreign investment and increased volumes of exports. During the same period, restrictions on population movement in the form of China's household registration, or hukou system, was relaxed, making migration increasingly possible. While the hukou status was still important, the government allowed non-state-owned enterprises to provide migrant workers with temporary urban resident cards, allowing them to live and work in cities. On top of this, demographic factors such as the age structure of the Chinese population also had an important influence on migration patterns. High levels of fertility in the 1950s, followed by a rapid drop during the 1970s, resulted in a population with a high proportion of young adults during the 1980s and the 1990s. As you can see from the table, the two largest groups were the 15 to 19-year-olds and the 20 to 24-year-olds. Guangdong was the most sought-after destination of interprovincial migrants for the period of 1990 to 2005. At its peak, this province net migration accounted for about one-third of the nation's total interprovincial migration in 1995 to 2000. Migration patterns also reflected the intensification of regional industrial restructuring beginning in the late 1980s, whereby inland provinces lost proportionally more manufacturing jobs to the coastal provinces in the second half of the 1990s and onwards, giving rise to the emergence of Guangdong as the world's factory around the turn of the century. Interprovincial migration was also spurred by significant wage differentials between provinces, with low levels of economic development and those containing the centres of recent industrial growth. Over time, the number of low-income inland provinces from where large numbers of labour migrants originate has also increased. In fact, the idea of migrating long distance for a better job has gained popularity over time in many provinces, including those in the west region of China. So there you have it, a brief overview of China's migration patterns after 1978 and the reasons for such trends.